What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 194. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Covering on today's show, Assange's prison conditions, talking about a alleged coup plot in Ukraine, and then what the military is doing for soldiers who are not meeting the vaccination mandate. So all that and more on today's show. Be sure to share the show. You find it at the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle for a full archive of the show. You can also find the show on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey. We post our social media accounts at Facebook and Twitter. The Twitter handle is at @con_interest. I'm at Kyle Anzalone _. And then you can also donate to the show at Patreon, Subscribestar, and the crypto information is in the show notes page. You can also support the show by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE. When you spend $75, you use that promo code and it gets you 25% off. It's a fantastic deal, and it's a fantastic selection of high quality CBD products. They got everything you could want over there at Paloma Verde: gummies, topicals, tinctures, soft gels, even products for your dog. Just again, be sure to use the promo code PEACE when you check out. If you're new to CBD, if you're somebody that's got like a little bit of pain, muscle pain, back pain, try their sports cream. It works absolutely great. It's a very nice, refreshing menthol smell. It's a little bit cooling, and I couldn't recommend it enough. I find it to be very effective for myself. So again, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. All the information is in the show notes page. Be sure to check them out and do your CBD shopping there. Now let's get into the show, first talking about Assange and the prison conditions that he is facing in a new article from the Gray Zone and Kit Clarenberg. It's reporting on a new file, a new trove of documents that were given to the Gray Zone, revealing some communications in the Australian government about Julian Assange. Now, the main part of this article is highlighting how Julian Assange, who is an Australian citizen, has gotten zero help from his government, despite his government understanding the cruel treatment that he is facing. As an American, this angle of the story is the one I've covered least on the show. I think there's some importance to it. I think that there's a possibility that, this could be a route for Julian Assange to at least get better treatment, maybe a little bit more fair treatment, if not outright get him out of jail. However, I know the least about this, the political dynamics in Australia and how that all works. And so the part of this article that I thought would be really important to talk about on today's show is actually, Julian Assange's conversation, then the Australian government's understanding of his prison conditions. And so Julian spends 23 hours a day in his cell and then is only allowed a half hour of outdoor time, but at times it doesn't happen and he really doesn't get an explanation for that. And so this is a really cruel and psychological torture that they're putting him under, where he has like one half hour a day where he would be able to have something, it'd be hard to call it enjoyment, but, a little bit of physical stimulation is really important for the brain. And if you're outside and you're seeing different things, natural sunlight, again, could all be very, very good for you. And so this being denied to Julian Assange on an arbitrary basis is a really vindictive and terrible thing to do. Now, maybe it's just some lazy prison guard who sleeps through Julian Assange's outside time one day or something like that. But it's just absolutely unacceptable way to treat anyone, to, have them locked up this long and then deny them without explanation the one enjoyable thing they could do every day. Now, Julian Assange apparently was supposed to meet with this person a second time, an Australian official who traveled and met with him in the Belmarsh prison. But Assange is only allowed a couple visits a month, and I think there's exceptions made for his legal team. But I think that, like, if he were to meet with Nils Melzer from the UN or, this Australian official, it would cost him his personal visits, and that's time that he could get to spend with his family, his two young children, no matter how restricted and awful that must be, to have to visit with your children in that way. I think I heard a podcast with Kit Clarenberg and Kevin Gostola, and Kit was explaining that was the situation that Assange was in. So there's potentially more that we could learn about his prison sentence that we haven't yet, just because he's choosing to spend the little time that he gets to spend with people outside of his legal team and outside of his jail cell with his family. And maybe they're not talking the terrible conditions he's in all the time, since his two young children are probably there for at least some of the visits, although I'm not sure what the situation is, that they're allowed out of the prison or not. There's also the issue, I guess, that the UK has brought up, that Assange would be allowed more time out of his cell if he would work under a work supervision program. Now, there's multiple problems with this, and I wonder if Assange wanted to, if he would even qualify and be able to. And I think there's pretty strict standards on this, but this is a form of not so far away from slavery, where basically you tell people that you have to stay inside of an 8x6 box all day, this tiny like parking space of a box. You have absolutely nothing for stimulation, nothing to do, no exercise equipment, like a hole to poop in, and that's just about it. Somebody comes in once a day and gets you a little bit of food under the door, or probably 2 or 3 times a day, I guess. And then you could get out of there, but the only way you could do it is by going to work, but they're only going to pay you $13 a week. And so this is essentially like slave labor wages. They're really not paying anyone. The payment would be getting out of your cell. But this is essentially what's happened in many American prisons, where you are punished if you're unwilling to take up either prison jobs or outside labor jobs, where the prison gets huge amounts of the money that you actually make, and you only get to keep a few pennies of the the many dollars that you earn. And if you don't participate in that, they throw you in solitary confinement and stuff like that. And so this is another form of torture that Julian Assange is undergoing. He is reported to have 2 violations since being in the Belmarsh prison, and one of them was for apparently having a razor blade in his cell. I'm not exactly sure what the details around this are, if it's confirmed from the Assange side that this was the case, if maybe he alleges that it was planted or a fabrication. I don't know. It seems very surprising to me that he would be able to get himself a razor blade. So that would be the one big question that I have around that. And then the second violation was for not having a tidy enough cell, which is just absolutely absurd. And then a third violation could result in him losing his exercise privileges, the 30 minutes a day that he gets to go outside. Now, another thing, that really cruel thing that they did to Julian Assange here in Belmarsh is, they did give him some medical work. They say, Kit says in this article, he got some antibiotics, but they also told him that he was HIV positive, which Assange had no idea of. And then they went through multiple other tests, and I think the prison's kind of explanation of it was it's a false positive, although these are extremely rare. And it seems to me that this would be a way to really, send somebody off of the deep end. You wondering if he had been tested before he was with his current partner, wife, Stella Morris. He would wonder if he got it from her, because so a lot of kind of paranoia and craziness in a person to bring this up and tell them that they have an STD that they actually don't have. And So yeah, I think that's most of what in the article, describes his prison sentence. Again, there is a lot of important stuff out in here about how Australia could do something to help Julian Assange. And, for anybody who's an activist in Australia, I really encourage you to work on that and see what you could do. I guess with the current Australian government and Morrison, that doesn't seem likely. There's another good article out on Julian Assange in general. This goes back to the Guardian's reporting of Julian Assange trying to either get like a passport to Russia or to or alleging that he met with Paul Manafort, and these both added to the Russiagate hysteria in the fall of 2018. And so this is, again, published at Min Press News by John McEvoy and Pablo Navarrete. A very good article here by these two. They interview a few people for this article, and specifically Antor Martinez, who was a lawyer for Ecuador, who was actually the guy who was working with the Assange team on putting together some kind of package situation in 2018 to get Julian Assange, or it might have been before 2018 actually, to get Julian Assange out of the Ecuadorian embassy. And according to the Assange legal team and according to Ecuadorian officials, that the plan was to give Julian Assange a diplomatic passport to basically make him a citizen of Ecuador, and then give him a passport and make him a official to the Ecuadorian embassy in Serbia, and this would give him kind of a permission to travel from the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK to Serbia. And the end of the way international law is supposed to apply, this is supposed to be legal. Now, I don't know if this actually would have worked. It seemed a little bit like a bad idea to me. But at the same time, who knows? Maybe if you really thought like the UK was that committed to international law that they would let this happen or something. They make clear that the Assange team was only considering Assange going to countries like Serbia, China, Venezuela, Greece, or Cuba, and specifically did not want Assange to go to Russia. At some point, there was some offer that came within the Ecuadorian government to have Assange get a passport to go to Russia, but the Assange team absolutely 100% rejected this. And so this narrative directly contradicts what the Guardian reported in September of 2018 with Russia's secret plan to help Julian escape. I think the original title of the article, and they change it to sources say. And again, that article alleges that Julian Assange had this plan to go to Russia. And it fueled a lot of the Russiagate speculation that, Russia had the DNC, given the emails to Julian Assange, who then helped, Trump win the election with those emails because Vladimir Putin was in control of all of this. And, see, here's proof that that's what was trying to happen. However, the actual story really cuts against that because the Assange legal team rejected the idea of going to Russia. Now, there's another part of this story that's very interesting, and that is that after they had cooked up this plan, and I guess we're, talking about Assange going to another country, whether, Serbia, Cuba, or something like that, the plan was nits because the U.S. ambassador to Ecuador showed up at and said, listen, we know Julian Assange is about to leave the embassy using a diplomatic passport and we'll never allow it. And so as I had assumed that the Americans had Julian Assange try to do this, would have either orchestrated his arrest or had just done it themselves. And so there's a couple things here, I guess, that are interesting. One, up until this point, at least, the Assange team was unaware of the extent of the surveillance that UC Global had in the Ecuadorian embassy. because, you know, they were planning this and the American government became aware, they obviously weren't using enough secret communication methods, or maybe we're just talking about open in the public because they thought that this was impossible. And so, you know, this is a really interesting part of the whole story, is that the U.S. was spying on Assange and his legal team so heavily, they knew about this plan. Let's see. Then the another part of this that's really important is there are emails that were exposed between the Guardian and UC Global. And UC Global is the firm that was contracted with the Ecuadorian government to provide security at the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK where Julian Assange was staying. It was exposed by international media, the Grey Zone, and also Yahoo News, that UC Global was working with Sheldon Adelson and the U.S. government to get communication, spy on everything Assange was doing, and even the U.S. government talked about the potential of like using this information, and I guess potentially UC Global, in a plot against Julian Assange's life. But it actually went as far as the firm trying to steal a diaper from Julian Assange's partner to try to confirm that her kids were Julian Assange's. So, you know, this was going on in the embassy and this spying. And so we now know that the Guardian was emailing UC Global asking them for information about the Paul Manafort visit that they alleged happened between Julian Assange and Paul Manafort in 2016. This was another key link in the whole Russiagate saga. It was proof, again, of the collusion between WikiLeaks and the Trump administration and further Russia to steal the election from Hillary Clinton. However, what it actually shows is that from the communications that the Guardian had with UC Global was unable to turn up Paul Manafort being at the embassy, which is absolutely critical because this was the organization that was surveilling every secret thing that was happening at the embassy. And so, you know, there's two ways, as pointed out in this mid-press article, that it should have been very easy, like cut and dry. Like, you can't disprove a negative, but you can actually kind of disprove that Julian Assange didn't meet with Paul Manafort in 2016, because you know exactly where Julian Assange was 24/7, every last hour, every last second of every day in 2016. He was in the Ecuadorian embassy. And knowing that means that if you have that building surveilled and Paul Manafort didn't come to that building, you know that Julian Assange didn't meet with Paul Manafort. Also, there was CCTV of that building that the Guardian reviewed, and at least has not published any positive confirmation of Paul Manafort's, visiting the embassy. And their corrections to this story, which, go to sources say, report, this kind of language makes it seem that they actually don't have any confirmation that Paul Manafort was ever at the embassy. And so, this article really does a great job of explaining that it's absolutely unconscionable for the Guardian to not retract its story and reporting here that are critical to the falling apart Russiagate narrative, and also smear Julian Assange. And there's a real big question mark here too about what the Guardian was doing, spending more time asking UC Global about who was at the embassy or not, rather than reporting on the fact that UC Global was spying on Julian Assange and his privileged conversations with his own attorneys. Seems to be a much more groundbreaking story, especially since, it's the U.S. government that's looking to prosecute Assange that's behind all this spying and surveillance. One last story on Julian Assange, a little bit of a good note, as far as it could go for somebody who's in a situation like Julian Assange, and that is he's gotten permission after a little bit of legal fighting to marry Stella Morris's partner in prison. I'm not sure what the, actual procedure here will look like, if he will get to kiss his wife, or the no contact rule will apply, and, it'll just be more of a legal formality. But at the same time, these are two people who have two children together, so obviously, have a deep relationship. So I'm sure, this is far more than just like a publicity stunt or a legal maneuver or anything like that. And it's great for that reason that they get to be married. But I will acknowledge too that this may provide Julian with some additional help, legally, in various different ways, in the US especially, but also in the UK. If Stella Morris, is technically his wife, maybe, she would get to have more visits with him and stuff like that. Or, if he ends up being in a more medical, terrible situation, but if his medical situation gets worse, I think that would give her like more automatic authority over his care and stuff like that, which would be really important, as terrible as it is to think about. So, good for Julian. Hopefully, that is something enjoyable, something he likes and is happy about, even though I'm sure there's very little with his present situation that ever feels anything like enjoyable. All right, now let's talk about the U.S.-Russian relationship. This is a very rocky situation. There is a lot to talk about here. We'll start with Russia and then the U.S. confirming that the U.S. had flown nuclear bombers within 12.4 miles of Russia's borders during exercise Global Thunder. And 10 strategic bombers practice employing nuclear weapons against Russia. And this is obviously something that would, make Russia feel really uncomfortable if it happened in the U.S. and was reported by the mainstream media. I'm sure many Americans would be upset about it. And so, this is obviously a very provocative thing that the United States is doing. And at a time where, the Biden administration, first of all, is crying constantly about the climate change stuff, you would think that cutting out these unnecessary training flights right up to Russia's borders with these very costly high carbon planes, like the strategic bombers and everything, you want to like walk away and cut those things down as much as possible. And one advantage would be is you could go to Russia and both sides could agree to cut down on flights or something like that. But obviously the opposite is happening here, and the US is carrying out these provocative exercises. Germany has formed a new government. I don't think the new leader is officially in place yet. His name is Olaf Scholz, and he will replace Angela Merkel, who has been in that position for well over a decade now, as Germany's chancellor. So I guess, it doesn't seem like much is changing. Germany's going to keep hosting U.S. nukes. It doesn't look like that's going to move or change at all in this situation, which, with the U.S. flying nuclear bomber runs up to Russia's borders, may make, Germany a target for Russia in some ways. The U.S. is also starting off the Winter Shield 21 war games. It's going to run the last couple weeks of November into December. Bunch of armored military units coming in from different NATO countries to train on different maneuvers and stuff like that. Of course, this is a country that borders Russia. Again, very provocative drills and everything that the U.S. is carrying out here. Ukraine has deployed special operations forces to its border with Belarus to carry out military exercises there. Of course, Belarus is Russia's probably strongest ally, I guess. It's not a Russian proxy state, but it is a state that, has a mutual defense agreement with Russia. It's going to, if Belarus is attacked, I think largely Russia would probably come defend it. And so this is, like a NATO versus Russia situation with Ukraine, which isn't technically a NATO member, but with the statements we're hearing from the head of NATO and Joe Biden, which we'll get to in a minute, and then Belarus, that this is increasing tensions between the U.S. and Russia, and this comes after Ukraine has deployed already 8,500 troops to its border with Belarus over fears that migrants could enter through that border. Ukraine also carried out military drills along the region of Ukraine that is in rebellion to the government. So it put an extra 8,500 troops in the Donetsk region. And, this, while the Ukrainians will say, oh, we're just carrying out the military drills in case it's a defensive kind of thing. Maybe it's a show of force. Of course, it seems also to be a military buildup in an area where there's a separatist that are, people will say Russian bat, and I don't think it's exactly like, they're puppets of the Russian government or anything, but certainly the rebellion in the Donbas region is heavily supported by Russia, and, Russia does allow that rebellion to continue in some ways. Now, I'm sure they would, continue to fight and just wouldn't immediately subject themselves if they weren't backed by Russia. But at the same time, when the U.S. gives, Ukraine more military power and stuff like that, Russia has matched on the other side of the border as well to prevent and kind of keep the lines that are in Ukraine between the East and the West where they are. We have Ukraine asking the NATO for a constant warship presence in the Black Sea. And the U.S. met this call by sending the USS Arleigh Burke into the Black Sea. This is a U.S. guided missile destroyer, and it joins two other destroyers which are already in the Black Sea. So this is... Or actually, I guess Dave writes here that the other two, the USS Porter and the USS Mount Whitney, had just completed their operations in the Black Sea. So this is keeping up with the, U.S. constant presence of having some kind of warship in the Black Sea, which largely is not exactly a Russian lake, but kind of a Russian lake. Lots of Russian borders on the Black Sea, no U.S. borders on the Black Sea. We had the U.S. delivering 2 patrol boats to the Ukraine. They are island-class patrol boats and former U.S. Coast Guard ships. They've been, decommissioned and refurbished. The U.S. is going to give them 5 in total, and I think these are the delivery of the first 2. Now, with everything going on, the U.S. is not warning that, we're trying to hold back our allies in Ukraine and de-escalate the situation. No, the U.S. warns of the Russian military activity near Ukraine's border and also in Crimea. So, most of the listeners of the show know that when you look at a map of Ukraine, the eastern region, the Donbas region, is the region in rebellion, but also the Crimean Peninsula, South Ukraine, was, when the USSR broke apart, a part of Ukraine. But then the U.S. coup in Ukraine in 2014 and the threats to join NATO led Russia to annexing the Crimean Peninsula, which was backed by a referendum of the people in Crimea. Like 80+% of the people were all for Russia annexing Crimea. Russia has dumped a lot of infrastructure money into Crimea since seizing it. And so, that's kind of the situation where the Crimean Peninsula is once again a part of Russia, and the eastern region isn't an area of Russia, or isn't an area of Ukraine that Russia really has an interest in annexing or expanding to, because it would be like an economic liability. And also there's probably some consideration in Moscow that this is the area of Ukraine that is largely ethnically Russian, has a lot of historical ties towards Russia, and is pro-Russia. They would rather, sign some kind of a deal with Russia than they would with NATO or the EU or something like this if they were given, either or option, as the EU had done to Ukraine in the past. So Russia, seeing that situation, I think, would rather this area remain a part of Ukraine, because if the country's going to have elections, then, this is a lot of votes who are going to vote for a candidate that is going to be more friendly towards Russia than, people in Kiev in the west of Ukraine, who are more likely to vote for a candidate who's going to be hostile towards Russia and pro joining NATO. So Ukraine is claiming, I think they have like 92,000 troops in the region. I don't think this is an occupation or invasion force or anything like that. My sense is that Russia is probably upset with the U.S. military exercises on its borders, and then with the Ukrainian military buildup and the threats from like Poland and everything towards Belarus, has led that Russia to take these military actions as kind of counter maneuvers to what everybody else is doing. Not that it's a little bit more cyclical. It's not just that the Russians are only responding. They build up a little bit, the other side build up a little bit, and stuff like that. But ultimately, it is the U.S. that could start to walk this thing back, but has continued to push it forward. We had the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, warning Russia that if Russia uses force against Ukraine, it will have consequences. Kind of weird because, again, Ukraine isn't actually a part of NATO, although, as Ted Galen Carpenter points out, it is treated as a de facto member of NATO, like by the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, and the President of the United States, Joe Biden. It's important to remember that Ukraine isn't actually a member state. Now, one important thing that Stoltenberg said is that the Russian military buildup is unprovoked and unexplained and risk miscalculation. Now, look, you could say that Russia is acting like too aggressively or something, like trying to spin it, but to say that it's unprovoked and unexplained is a very concerning statement, because if Stoltenberg really doesn't understand that the U.S. putting warships in the Black Sea is going to provoke some kind of reaction from Russia, then we are in a situation where a miscalculation or mistake could really happen. So hopefully he's just spouting off mindless propaganda and not thinking about it hard enough. We also have Joe Biden saying that the United States support for is Ukraine's territorial integrity and Ukraine's sovereignty, suggesting that the U.S. would do something if Russia invaded Ukraine. I'm not sure exactly what the U.S. could or would do if Russia would go ahead and invade, which I really don't think Russia is going to do. Kind of like what happened in Georgia in 2000, I want to say 8. It was quite a while ago. I was back in high school. I remember that much. When there's this situation where the U.S. kept telling Georgia, we back you, we back you, we back you. So Georgia overstepped and tried to seize a territory that was in part defended by Russian peacekeepers. And once Russia came in and took, made sure they got all that territory plus a little bit more, there was nothing the U.S. could do about it. And that may be the situation that actually plays out in Ukraine if the U.S. does push Russia to take military action. Probably the most interesting, important thing coming out on the whole situation in Ukraine is we have the Ukrainian president Zelensky alleging a coup plot was thwarted against him, and that it was going to be carried out by Russians. Now, when he made his statement on Friday, he was very clear to say that it was Russians, not Russia, which, for people who don't know maybe the distinction or the difference there, is that, there are a lot of ethnic Russians in Ukraine, and so if they are trying to carry out a coup, that may or may not be backed by the Russian government. Those are two not necessarily the same things, and very easy for people, especially in the Western mainstream media, to conflate the two things. And I just want to make sure, very important, to say that there's a very big difference there. But I'm not exactly convinced that this coup was about to happen until the Ukrainian government turns up any kind of evidence or anything like that. I'll remain very skeptical. He says the coup would have taken place, the week we are now in, but I really don't think it's going to happen. Ukraine, by the way, is warning that Russia is going to invade in January of 2022. And there may just be a little bit of hysteria at play here, along with looking for maybe ways to have political wins. Good, we foiled a coup makes you look like a good, strong, tough leader who's really in charge of his government. So with all this going on, one of the really important things that I have talked about with the U.S.-Russian relationship in probably the past month, probably the biggest bright spot I said, was CIA Director William Burns traveling to Russia. Now, the hope was that Burns, who was a statesman, somebody that, even Ray McGovern has said, seems to really understand the U.S.-Russian relationship, famously, wrote the net means net memo, kind of saying that Russia has a serious red line about Ukraine joining NATO. And somebody understanding Russian red lines and actually talking to the Russians is probably a good thing, rather than, having somebody like Victoria Nuland go to Russia as Joe Biden did, who actually orchestrated the 2014 coup in Ukraine, or was heavily, heavily involved in that, as is known because the phone call where she is plotting the coup has been released and is available for anybody to listen to in public. Just searching Google F the EU. All right, so yeah, hoping that Burns goes. He's the statement. He says we had to get this in line. And what does he go over there to do? He warns Russia that there will be consequences if they are behind the recent Havana Syndrome attacks, which, is something I've talked about on this show very, very frequently. That, I'm very skeptical that Havana Syndrome exists whatsoever. I think it's largely a psychosomatic, thing, plus cases generated by the U.S. government, essentially warning everyone, if you have a headache, if you feel like you're not as sharp as you used to be, did a lot of drinking last night, you have a pretty severe hangover. Might not be a hangover. It might be that the Russians are shooting some kind of microwave gun at your head, and that's causing you to, go crazy and have brain damage. While they can't actually prove that this exists, and a lot of science has, really shown that this is unlikely to be true. Scott Horn did a good interview, and I forget this woman's name, but one of the things that she explains is there's no external symptoms whatsoever, and they allege that this is a microwave gun, which you would see external symptoms on the skin if people are being had their head blasted with microwaves. Of course, originally they claimed that this was a sonic weapon, and it turned out when they recorded it, it was just crickets and not a sonic weapon. So, you got Burns traveling to Russia and threatening them over this fake thing. And it suggests to me that he is not quite the statesman that I had hoped. That he probably wouldn't fly to Russia and threaten them over this if he could really look at the evidence here. Just a couple more things on Havana real quick, though, that I think are important, is that the FBI is essentially acknowledging that Havana Syndrome is real, even though they really can't identify what it is, and that they are going to get agents who suffer from it with access to medical care. So this is certainly going to ramp up the number of psychosomatic cases if you're starting to offer free healthcare for it, as well as the FBI warning its staff about Havana Syndrome. So basically saying, hey, anytime you got a headache, send your boss an email because it may be Russian secret brainwaves, not, you did too much drinking last night. And also the FBI is saying that Havana Syndrome is a top priority of theirs. I guess the only positive thing I could absolutely think about this is the FBI investigating something fake may be less damaging than the FBI investigating other things, but it seems like they're going to churn up an awful lot of anti-Russian propaganda with these investigations. Last thing real quick on the whole Russia issue, and that is the Poland-Belarus border crisis seems to have been clipped down a couple more notches over the past week, as another 570 migrants were flown out of Belarus and back to Iraq. The plane landed in Erbil, kind of confirming some of the things I have been talking about on the show over the past couple weeks, believing that most of the people that were at the border with Belarus were Iraqi Kurds, having a lot of interesting, I don't know, bad story there, right? Where, the Iraqi Kurds were some of the, preferred Iraqis for the Americans over the past 20 years. And yet you have massive numbers of them fleeing and, at least allowing for a border crisis to be manufactured in Belarus. Now, I say manufactured not because I necessarily am 100% targeting the Belarusian government and Lukashenko, although I don't think that government did anything to stop and maybe incentivize this to happen somewhat. But to talk about the mainstream media some here for weeks and weeks and weeks is constantly talking about this border crisis, on the situation with Belarus, and drumming up war propaganda with Russia, talking about this is equivalent to terrorism and all this insane rhetoric that almost belongs like in a, Republican Party anti-George Soros ad, is essentially what they're accusing Putin and Lukashenko of being here. And to just, kind of remember and put this into context, we are talking about a few thousand, 4,000 to 5,000. There are far more people along the U.S. southern border. And while I'm not trying to diminish the suffering that the people are going through on that border, and the fact that 10 people have died in the past couple of months is absolutely tragic. However, we did just have 27 people drowned to death in the English Channel trying to cross from France to England, which, shouldn't have a border crisis at all, right? Aren't these two countries friends? And why are migrants trying to get the hell out of France to get to England is one question. But again, like, how can these two countries not work together to come up with something? And why isn't the media now 100% focused on the border crisis between France and England, because that's already far more deadly than the one between Poland and Belarus. Also, you see a lot of the same thing with migrants trying to cross Libya. All the time there are people dying trying to make that cross from Libya to Italy, and it's rarely, if ever, reported on anymore. One was like 100,000 people a year, tens of thousands of people, drowning to death. Then, they were talking about and reporting on it, but now that it's only, a few score people, a dozen people here or there, something like that, really doesn't get talked about. Although, that situation is far more serious, far more migrants, far more death than the one on Belarus and Poland. All right. Let's move on and talk about the Pentagon a little bit. The first is the Pentagon funding bill, the NDAA. One of the things happening in Congress right now is they're talking about amendments to the bill, and with all the anti-Russia rhetoric going on and all the anti-Russia stories in the media, Russia's Russian aggression, Russia building up on Ukraine's border and everything, members of Congress are jumping over themselves to try to find ways to attack Russia through this bill. And so there's several different amendments targeting Russia with sanctions, and specifically sanctions against the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is going to bring natural gas from Russia directly into Germany and not through countries like Belarus, which recently has threatened to cut off the gas through, or Ukraine, which is notoriously corrupt. And, this would bring Central Europe cheaper gas, and again, you wouldn't have to deal with some of the Eastern European strawmen, tyrants, and kind of nut jobs as presidents there. So in a way, this kind of sounds like it should be a good thing, but I think largely for mercantilist reasons, there are interests in the U.S. that do not want this to happen. It would prefer to put the liquefied natural gas on these big ships and bring it from the United States over to Germany that way, but of course the pipeline underneath, I think the Baltic Sea there, is going to be a lot faster and cheaper than the big ship option. So That's the reason that Germany is going this direction and doesn't want to be sanctioned by the US. However, the US has, talked about potentially sanctioning Germany over this, in part because the US has targeted the Russian energy sector with sanctions. And so it would kind of follow this as sanctions to put on Germany. But again, also, I think there are just economic interests in the U.S. People don't want to lose out business when this pipeline becomes active. They want Germany to remain reliant on the U.S. for the natural gas. Now, the U.S. congressman will constantly say, but we have to protect the German and European interests, and if Russia builds this pipeline, they'll become dependent on Russian natural gas. And don't you think that Germany would be the country to decide who they want to be dependent on natural gas for, not some congressman in the United States who has never been to Germany? It's unbelievable what these people will try to cook up to push their lies. We have Senators Jean Shaheen and Ron Portman suggesting that the NDAA should have an amendment with another $50 million in annual defense spending for Ukraine. This is going to be military aid. Not exactly sure what they would be sending Ukraine, but Javelin missiles or something like that, and in any way looking to increase tensions between the U.S. and Russia, and benefit, I'm sure, Portman and Shaheen's donors in the military-industrial complex. We have Bob Menendez, who's a pretty powerful senator. He's the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He has introduced a amendment to the NDAA that would trigger a cascade of sanctions against Russia, including on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, if the president determined that Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, the important thing here is that, by the way the U.S. looks at the world map, Russia has already invaded Ukraine with the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, and so this seems to be a blank check war authorization from Congress to launch a massive economic war against Russia anytime the president would want to just change its interpretation of what happened on the Crimean Peninsula to claim that Russia invaded and was now occupying Ukraine, and we're going to sanction all of Russia's energy and economic sectors and really try to put the country under a blockade situation. Not only do I think it would be somewhat ineffective because Russia has already been heavily sanctioned by the West, and I think it kind of has looked to isolate itself from potential sanctions. The more sanctions you put on a country, the less punch future potential sanctions could have, just kind of by the way that sanctions work. Once you've sanctioned most of an economy, threatening to sanction the little that's left is going to be less important, especially because these countries realize that they may have to rely on, at least outside of the West, options, if not only internal options for key, sectors like pharmaceuticals or stuff like that. So again, I don't know how effective this would actually be in doing what the U.S. wants to do, but also it's a blank check to put massive sanctions on Russia anytime a president wants. All right, some other stories about the military. This one is very interesting. Camp Lejeune, which is in North Carolina, is pretty disgusting, apparently. There's some Marines that put up a video, I think on TikTok, walking around and kind of showing what the barracks looks like, and it's pretty bad. And look, for somebody who would say that when you're a Marine, you don't sign up to live in the nicest conditions, etc., etc., Marines are tough and all that, I get it, kind of agree with you. However, the U.S. spends $1 trillion a year on its military, and the fact that, the Marines' barracks are completely moldy and the F-35 doesn't fly shows that there's something very, very, very wrong at the Pentagon. And, this should just be further, evidence of it, but rather, it's kind of just wiped off as a joke, if nothing else. And, people just should be absolutely livid that, not just that the Marines have to live in these conditions, these are people, but that, obviously the money is being stolen by somebody because it's not going to where it should be going. Other Pentagon news: the Pentagon got taken and bought some fake or faulty Chinese body armor through a Texas distributor. The guy's now facing charges for it, and that's fine that they caught it and everything like that. But yeah, the Air Force got conned by some phony Chinese armor. We also had the Pentagon announcing that it will give Huntington Ingalls an additional $113 million to its contract for a large amphibious assault ship that it's building. The total cost of that ship will now be $651 million. This, they claim the money is to enable long lead time material and advanced procurement activities. This is mumbo jumbo. Maybe they're claiming that things cost more now because of inflation, and that's why maybe there's supply chain issues that they're concerned about, and they had to build new infrastructure for that. I don't know exactly what they're claiming that this money is for. For all I know, it's just going to go straight into the pockets of like the board of Huntington Ingalls or something like that. We have the Pentagon once again awarding its cloud computing contract, although this one isn't called Jedi because the Jedi contract was terminated because Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Oracle just kept suing each other over everybody getting awarded the contract. So they now have the Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability, JWCC program, and to solve the problem of all these companies suing each other over not getting awarded the contract, they awarded bits of the contract to all these companies. Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, Google, and Oracle. Not sure what the breakdown, who's getting most of the money here. Hell, they may sue each other. Oracle's mad that Google got a bigger chunk of the deal or something like that. But, the Pentagon said that this was absolutely essential, 4 or 5 years ago when it initially put out this contract. Now we are years later, and they've allowed it to be stymied by these companies fighting with each other rather than just awarding it to one and saying deal with it, or addressing the issues that actually come up in these lawsuits, like the fact that Amazon or either Amazon or Microsoft hired somebody who was working at the Pentagon, actually involved in the decision making on the contract, on the who would get awarded the Jedi contract, and they had that person under contract that they were going to come work at their company after. So the Pentagon could either resolve the revolving door issue, that way not everything gets tied up in court, or it could, just say that this is absolutely necessary and we need it. I think it just goes to show what a farce the whole system is, and, how little they actually need this technology. They claim that every American will die and be a slave of the Chinese if we don't have. And it's just, all giveaways to their friends and, former colleagues in the military industrial complex. Lockheed Martin's testing its new AIM-260 Joint Advanced Tactical Missile. It's AIM-260 or JATM. It's a pretty secretive weapon. Don't know a lot about it, but we do now know that they are testing it. Of course, it's always presented in the U.S. whenever Lockheed Martin's testing or Raytheon is testing a new missile. Oh, hey, cool, look at the new military technology. But when Russia tests a missile, it's the Russian aggression is testing a new military weapon to enslave the world and all this crazy stuff, that it doesn't go both ways. All right, so there's this facility in Pearl Harbor, Red Hills, I believe. Yep, Red Hills, and they store thousands and thousands of gallons of fuel in these tanks. I think they're go all the way back to World War II. If you see the pictures here, you'll absolutely believe me that they're that old. And the tanks are increasingly leaking. The military first said, nah, this time it's just leaking water. But then, they found out that fuel had actually been leaking as well. One of the problems here is that it's near an aquifer, I believe, but some kind of groundwater area that's important for drinking water for people people, on the island. And so the fact that it's potentially leaking into there is a real problem. This, kind of like the Camp Lejeune, is just unacceptable. These branches of the military have tens, hundreds of millions of billions of dollars to spend a year, and then they can't prevent the fuel from contaminating and poisoning the people's drinking water. They say the military has to be there to protect us. More often than they protect us, they're actually poisoning us. All right, last story on the military I have, and I don't want people to get too excited or take it too seriously, but I do think it's worth mentioning and talking about briefly, and that is the new Pentagon office to look into UFOs, or I forget what they call them now, unidentified airborne objects maybe, but the new office will be Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group, and it will be nested under the office of the Undersecretary for Defense and Intelligence. Don't know exactly who's going to head it up yet. My sense is that this is going to end up being more of a generating a little bit of propaganda for more war spending, stuff like that. I don't think they're actually going to uncover UFOs or anything like that, or that the Pentagon is worried about an alien invasion and that's why they're coming up with this office. My sense is that it's going to be to fabricate intelligence for more defense spending, whether it's more likely at Russia, China, or some kind of other ET or something like that. All right, now let's get into the COVID rules for the military as they're beginning to roll out. We have some new information here from the Army, and they are saying that soldiers who refuse to get the COVID-19 vaccine and have not requested an exemption will no longer be allowed to re-enlist or be promoted, effectively ending their careers. And the new directive applies to active duty troops as well as reservists and National Guardsmen, as including those serving in states whose governors do not require the vaccine. I'm interested in how this will all play out between the National Guard and the Pentagon, because it seems like the state governor should have say over that, although maybe the Pentagon will leverage funding or something like that to get all these states in line. That's kind of the way I imagine that this ends up shaking out. But it is interesting that this is what the Army is saying, how they're going to handle it. I did kind of imagine that they wouldn't fire everyone first, as some people were suggesting, or maybe give people discharges, but rather just not let them sign back up. This is a better situation, I guess, although still, I think, very questionable decision making. The Marine Corps won't expel all unvaccinated Marines en masse after they miss the deadline, which is today. 91% of Marines are vaccinated with at least one shot, with 94% fully vaccinated. It's kind of interesting. It seems the Army has been taking a very you have to get vaccinated or you will be punished approach, while the Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, seemed to try to take a very friendly or conciliatory approach, saying we will be addressing each case on a case-by-case basis. We're just not going to kick them all out on the deadline itself. The Navy talks about that they are going to treat unvaccinated Marines in a very respectful manner and work with them so they understand the consequences of refusing the vaccine. So again, I think the Army and the Marine policy, as far as I could tell, is actually going to be kind of similar, where there's going to be a couple of times where they come and they say, hey, you should really take the vaccine. Then they're going to issue official, you need to take this order situation, and if you don't, there's going to, I think, be some counseling. I don't know if this means with your unit's medic or with a therapist or with a actual doctor, like your physician, somebody, I guess, is going to give you something along the lines of, hey, why don't you want the vaccine? Let's sit down and talk to it and see what we could work out. That's what Del Toro says. We're trying to find out what their problem and hold up in getting the vaccine is. Try to counsel them the best we can offer to an opportunity to change their mind in regards to the vaccination. Hopefully they'll get the vaccination at that point in time. And if they don't, obviously, then they're not going to be able to continue servicing in the Marine Corps. But again, the tone of it is much more, I think, let's try to work something out rather than, you're not going to be promoted and get the hell out. Now, this article also lays out the just some updates on the vaccination numbers in other branches. The Navy is 96.7% with one shot and 99.7% with two or fully vaccinated. They say that 6 medical exemptions have been given by the Navy and no religious exemptions. 800 airmen and 1,000 guardians, those are members of the Space Force, are currently unvaccinated. The Air Force has given out, it seems, over 1,600 exemptions. And the Army is 91% vaccinated with at least one shot, or fully vaccinated with only one medical exemption given. I'm not sure. Maybe there's more people who have applied for exemptions and they haven't rejected or passed. They really just have only passed a very few. But it's interesting that the Air Force is given so many more exemptions than the other branches. The Army issued its rules on how it's actually going to handle unvaccinated soldiers while they're unvaccinated. They say that only absolutely mission critical travel will be allowed, and they'll have to submit negative COVID-19 tests weekly before entering Army facilities. So one of the interesting things about this is the test will have to be provided through the unit, I believe, at that level, and they will not be able to buy the kits. Commanders cannot procure COVID-19 kits from medical treatment facilities and must purchase test kits using unit operating funds through the Army's Global Combat Support System. And it says there's only 3, tests that they could possibly buy. But one of the things, the reason I thought that this part was interesting is I wonder if it's going to hurt maybe any units at a budgetary level because it has to use the unit's operating funds to buy these tests. And maybe this is a social pressure kind of way, by you not getting vaccinated, we have to spend $1,000 a month on tests or whatever it is. And for that reason, you have to get you get more pressure from the guys serving in your unit, your friends, than just the military command in general. Seeing they're trying to make you hurt the people around you, or at least that's the way they're trying to make it come out. So this is an op-ed from the Hill, but I think it presents a very interesting challenge to the COVID vaccine mandate, and maybe the most powerful one so far. And that is the defense industry is warning that they are going to lose thousands of employees and have supply chain issues potentially with the F-35 and Columbia-class submarines because of the vaccine mandate. Raytheon is warning that they could lose several thousand employees. Textron has said that the vaccine mandate has not been well received, and they're ready to lose a sizable portion of their employees. This has gone to the point of Huntington Ingalls actually saying that they're just not going to enforce the vaccine mandate. And Google, which isn't always thought of as the biggest defense contractor, but obviously since they're getting the cloud computing contract, and if you look at Project Maven, there's over 600 employees there who have signed an open letter against the vaccine mandate, and actually I think says that, like, hey, if you don't want to get vaccinated, don't let this mandate bully you in to taking the mandate. And so, defense contractors standing up are kind of an interesting group. Not exactly people who you would think would be fighting against the central state, but they're worried about losing very quality and hard to replace employees, and so they're trying to get the Biden administration to kill it. Now, they're in an interesting position because they're not a part of the OSHA mandate, the private contractor mandate, although for whatever reason, Google falls under that one, but like Raytheon doesn't. But anyways, like the Raytheon, Lockheed Martin stuff, they don't fall under that one. They also don't fall under the Pentagon one. They fall under the federal worker one, which doesn't allow like a mask exemption or like, you could wear a mask and get tested in exchange for, instead of getting the vaccine. And apparently defense contractors are asking the Biden administration to carve out some kind of exemption for masks and and testing, rather than making everybody get vaccinated, because some of their employees just aren't going to do it. The Minnesota National Guard is going to take, I think, what is it, $50 billion and send 400 guardsmen to train as certified nursing assistants and temporary nursing aides in order to provide help to the understaffed nursing home facilities. I don't know. This is an interesting thing. In one sense, the National Guard is there to help in times of need, and if there are old people who can't physically take care of themselves anymore, they need somebody to help them take care of themselves or else they'll die, then these are people in need. At the same time, I'm pretty sure nobody who signed up for the National Guard ever thought that they would be changing adult diapers. And I think you increase cases of possibility of abuse a little bit when you put people in a position where they're doing like working with people in nursing homes and they really don't want to. Not exactly even like, some soldier's gonna haul off and punch some old guy in the face, but neglect and stuff like that happens. And I don't know, it seems like the kind of job that you should probably sign up for, and not just that you should have to go to because you joined the National Guard. That being said, maybe the people who sign up or something will want the certified nursing certificate or something like that, see it as a cheap way to get that certification, and could go ahead. And also, if they need a lot of certification, it seems like they won't be able to fill the staffing shortages anytime soon. The CDC has officially expanded and recommended that every adult in the United States get a booster 6 months after they already they got their first doses, or a single dose if you got the Johnson & Johnson, and it is either the Pfizer or the Moderna. Not sure or if any status on the Johnson & Johnson, if they're looking to do a booster or anything like that, but so far it seems like no matter what original shot you got, at least of the three, I know that there are quite a number of people in the US who are involved in tests for other vaccines, and so are kind of in a limbo state. But if you took Pfizer, Moderna, or Johnson & Johnson, then they are now telling you, the CDC, not, I guess, saying that you have to, but recommending that if you are over 18, to go ahead and get the booster shot. Not sure, what all the numbers are, what they're saying, how much is going to help or anything like that. As always, I'm not a doctor. You should talk to your doctor if you have questions about taking the vaccine. If you don't want to take it, if you do, you should probably talk to them and see what's going on, and what's with your own personal health issues. All right. Interesting story here from the Washington Post. Actually, it's really the interesting thing is the Pete Buttigieg interview with Chuck Todd, where the Transportation Secretary, Mayor Pete, tells Chuck Todd that, with the way the science works, with what they believe is the case in the White House, that people do not need a vaccine mandate to travel on the planes. It just really doesn't change safety. or the spread of the vaccine. I have no idea if that's true or not. That's just what the transportation secretary said. What I found really interesting was the way that Chut Todd pushed back against this. Two things that he said. One is saying that if he was worried about the U.S. Adopting a policy that was politically divisive, and I think actually suggesting that not having a mandate to be vaccinated to get on a plane was politically divisive, and that the Biden administration should worry about that, which is a questionable way to look at. But I think the more disturbing one was Chut Todd saying, if we are trying to get to the end of this pandemic, continuing to have sort of loopholes to avoid a vaccine seems to elongate the pandemic. And there's a lot of falsehoods baked into that and problems baked into that. But the main one is that, Chut Todd has Pete Buttigieg there, right? And his issue with them not mandating vaccines to get on planes isn't that, I talked to this expert who said that actually unvaccinated people on planes are 10 times more likely to spread it, or anything remotely like that. Masking, if you're unvaccinated, masking is in fact, there's a thousand things that I'm sure that they could have come up with, some experts saying, to question the actual evidence of, are unvaccinated people as safe on planes as vaccinated people, right? But that's not what Chut Todd was attacking. He was saying that if you give people loopholes, so Pete Buttigieg is saying that flying is just as safe if you're vaccinated or not. Chut Todd isn't disputing that. He is saying that the fact that you are, not restricting people's travel for being unvaccinated allows for people to continue to be unvaccinated, and that's a problem, right? Which it goes to my real problem with the media coverage of COVID, which is they are distinctly trying, and they'll openly say this, to get everybody to take the vaccine. And look, if the numbers really back people taking the vaccine, then you just talk about the numbers. But like the media has even said, that's a problem that like Fox News hosts aren't telling their followers or viewers to get vaccinated. They openly say the goal is for everybody to, they're just trying to push people to get vaccinated, not just to talk about what's actually happening. And again, it would be, I think, different if they're saying like, look, we're just talking about the truth and this is what the truth happens to be. But here again, I think you see Chut Todd really exposing the truth of what they're doing, which is just trying to bully everybody to get a vaccine and vaccine. And, it really not being if this activity is safe for being vaccinated or not, just merely if you can engage in that activity without a vaccine, it allows you to enjoy life a little bit without a vaccine. And Chut Todd sees that as a problem. Now, the other thing is the idea that people keep putting out there that if everybody was vaccinated, that there would be no pandemic. And I don't really see anything that suggests that that's actually the case. And I think it's kind of a dangerous lie to tell people if it's not true. One, if everybody does get vaccinated and then people are still getting and dying from COVID, which vaccinated people are, it is happening, then don't you destroy all of your credibility? And, also, even now, like, the plan isn't to have everybody on the planet vaccinated by the end of 2021. They're still not like allowing I think in South Africa, they're like trying their best to copy the Moderna vaccine because they can't get the recipe for it, right? So it's not like everybody on the planet's, about to be vaccinated or something. There's just a few people holding out, but there's vaccines everywhere. And it's just not the case that like COVID will magically go away once every person in the United States has taken 2, 3, 4, whatever, however many doses of Pfizer, Moderna, or Johnson & Johnson. That it's just nothing that anyone is saying is actually saying that's the case. In fact, Dr. Fauci is starting to say things like we're going to have to learn to live with COVID and all this. So, I mean, there's just so many dangerous and false things in what Chut Todd is saying there, and I think it's really important. Couple more stories I want to run through real quick. Los Angeles Public Schools is saying that if kids over 12 are not fully vaccinated, I think you have to have one one vaccine in the coming week here, and then two by the start of, or fully vaccinated, so maybe one of the Johnson by the start of their second semester in September, or they will not be able to attend in-person school. This is really concerning, especially with the risk of COVID and kids being so low. As terrible as schools are, and as much as, I think there are advantages to, more parents choosing homeschooling, I think putting more kids on remote learning isn't going to help them and push them further behind academically and socially, isolate the kids that don't have the vaccines. And again, there's just I've seen some studies that say in places where they chose not to do these kind of things in schools, they've had similar results. And again, I don't want to get into all the science here and get myself, or get into all the numbers here and get myself in trouble with YouTube. I just want to talk strictly about the news and this being the plan for the LA public schools. All right, in Long Island, this reported by the New York Times, a ER has closed because of staffing shortages caused by the COVID pandemic. Man, I just don't get it. In one sense, they're screaming that the hospitals are overrun by unvaccinated people, and then in the other, they're firing the unvaccinated nurses and closing ERs. And actually, we had in Massachusetts, the governor ordering some hospitals, because of staffing shortages, to start canceling non-essential procedures. And you could say all you want is a procedure is not essential unless it's yours, and then it probably feels pretty essential. Also saw that the state of New York issued a state of emergency in response to the new Omicron variant, which I don't know anything about yet, so I'm not going to talk about it on the show yet. But even though there's really no evidence that it's like at this point, worse than anything else, or any particular reason that this would cause a particular problem, Fauci has said that it's different and may evade immunity. But at least the cases that have been documented so far in South Africa, the people have been typical COVID symptoms, and not like anything crazy like Ebola or a very worse virus or anything like that. And so it seems very early for New York to do that, but canceling non-essential surgeries, you do have to wonder if that could also in New York be a part of helping to alleviate staffing shortages. The U.S. says that 90% of federal workers are vaccinated. 5% are seeking exemptions, leaving about 175,000 workers in a limbo state. And I think, kind of like the military, they're going to start with pushing counseling before actually firing people. Last story on today's show, the Department of Justice is pushing the courts to reinstate Biden's vaccination policy for private business. This is the OSHA rule. I believe it's in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals now, and currently they're not supposed to be putting it in place, and I think OSHA has halted. I don't know how this court battle is going to play out, but it's really important to a lot of people, so I'm sure people are paying attention to it. I'll continue to follow the trial and provide any breakdowns where I can. Anytime I think I could get into the legal details and talk about it in a way that's helpful. But anyways, that's what I have for the show today. Please, everybody, thank you so much for listening to the show. Continue to share, like, subscribe, do all that great stuff. Libertarian Institute, Facebook, Twitter, at Kyle Anzalone _ at con_interest, Patreon, Subscribestar, and get your CBD at Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE.